In the name of God, we continue our discussion on American structuralism. As pointed out in the section 1 above, the term linguistic structuralism not only applies to the immediate European heirs of Saussure, but also to a number of American linguistics since the 1930s. Okay, we have both the European structuralism and the American structuralism. Also, the influence of Sapir in 1921 was considerable. The main representative of this American branch of structuralism were Bloomfield and his student Harris, whose ideas dominated American linguistics in the 1940s and 1950s. Okay, we have both European structuralism and American structuralism. As Sapir was one of the considerable person and representative of American branch of structuralism, but the main representative of this branch were Bloomfield and his student Harris, whose ideas dominated American linguistics in the 1940s and 1950s. Because Bloomfield was appointed professor of linguistics at Yale University in 1940 after Sapir's death, American structuralism is also referred to as the Yale School. Okay, it is the reason, dear student, which we consider Bloomfield as a representative of the American structuralism, because Bloomfield was appointed professor of linguistics at Yale University in 1940. After Sapir's death, American structuralism is also referred to as the Yale School. Nowadays, it is common practice to restrict the term structuralism in American linguistics to the period before the advent of Chomsky. Also, the extent to which generative grammar continues some of the basic structuralist tenets, like focus on the systematicity of language, favoring linguistic structures over semantics, feature analysis, the scant attention paid to a language experience. These matters are shared between the American structuralism and the generative grammar of Chomsky. It is still a subject of considerable debate. It is important to keep in mind that when applied to American linguistics, the term structuralism carries some specific characteristics which considerably alter its scope in comparison to its European counterparts. Okay, here we will be familiar with the differences between the American structuralism and European structuralism. I want to repeat it again. Okay, here we will read about the American the structuralism characteristics in American comparison to the European counterpart. First of all, there is a radically empirical character of linguistic analysis carried out by Bloomfield and the post-Bloomfieldian. Here too, the influence of the theory of science of the Vienna Circle was considerable. Okay, first of all, there is a radically empirical character of linguistic analysis. Here, in the American structuralism, we have empirical character of linguistic analysis, which was carried out by Bloomfield and the post-Bloomfieldian. Here too, the influence of the theory of science of the Vienna Circle was considerable. Bloomfield and his descendant, also called distributionalist or descriptivist, were very much interested in setting out a comprehensive picture of language as a hallmark of human culture in widest sense of that term. Okay, we consider the Bloomfield and his followers and his descendants as a distributionalist or descriptivist. If I ask you that who are distributionalists or descriptivists, you should say that this refers to the Bloomfield and his descendants. Okay. Bloomfield's language, which published in 1933, the Bloomfield book, which was language, which published in 1933, for example, is not only an admirably lucid textbook, but also an unequaled state of art in which virtually all aspects of language study known at the time are dealt with at some length. Second, here we will read about the language book of Bloomfield, about the feature of this book. Second, American structuralism introduced a new methodology by maintaining that all linguistic analysis should be conducted on the basis of data extracted from a representative corpus. Here we will be familiar with another character of American structuralism, which were mentioned in the language book of Bloomfield. The third one, special emphasis was laid on the comprehensive descriptions of linguistic forms, that is, the sound system and phonotactics of languages, their morphology and syntax. Meaning, on the other hand, was virtually excluded from the analysis, as it was considered as an aspect of language that, although important in itself, wasn't amenable to a truly empirical structuralist linguistic. Okay, they had stress on the comprehensive description of linguistic forms like sound system, phonotactics of language, morphology, syntax, and they don't emphasize on the meaning. Bloomfield conceived his linguistic theory explicitly along the lines of behaviorist psychology and his ideal in the method of the natural sciences. As noted above, this point of view was in stark contrast to the creed of European structuralism. Okay, here in this paragraph, we read about the differences between the American structuralism and European structuralism. You should know them. The focus on a corpus, like a finite but infinitely extensible set of naturally occurring utterances, displays a marked absence of faith in intuition, which for American structuralists is either a source of unwarranted prejudices or error in linguistic analysis. It was not until its explicit introduction in Chomsky's mentalistic theory of language that intuition was accepted as a valuable linguistic tool in post-war American linguistics, without, however, filling the gap that had been left by the distributionalist evasiveness with regard to semantic. The scholarly work of American structuralists was strongly weighted toward a classification and establishing adequate methods for conducting them. For the late 1950s, generative grammarian would rather contemptuously refer to this research strand with the term discovery procedures. Each linguistic unit at all levels of analysis was first characterized as to its set of possible occurrences, its so-called distribution, what is essential. Zelig Harris in 1951, right? Is the restriction to distribution as determining the relevance of inquiry. The elements that can occupy the same positions in an utterance and display a similar distribution are grouped together. And the classes thus delineated are ordered hierarchically Note that as its point of departure, distributionalism assumes the undeniable existence of elements, and that is viewpoint contrasts with the Saussurean view that elements derive their function from relation within the system rather than the other way around. This emphasis on observable phenomena precludes an interest in differences that are not really extractable from a corpus. Dedication to surface phenomena in language would be vehemently attacked by early generative grammar, for whom surface structure are triggered by transformation of more abstractive structures. In the next section, we discuss some of the issues that deal with by structural linguistic and very, very useful compared to American and European structuralist tradition. Okay, dear student, you should know about the important notion and point of the American structuralism. And here in these paragraphs, we compare the American and European structuralism with each other. Structuralism in linguistic subdisciplines. Structuralism and phonology. Okay, dear student, we will read about the subpart of the language and the structuralism, the relation between them. About the structuralism and phonology. At the level of sound, which was initially the main target for the application of a structuralist method and principles, the linguist shouldn't concentrate on sound in isolation, but rather on those differences between them which are termed functionally relevant and distinguish functional units in the sound system of a given language. Okay. About the sound, what is the idea of a structuralist about the sound, about the phonology? At the level of sound itself, which was initially the main target for the application of a structuralist method and principle, the linguist shouldn't concentrate on sound in isolation, but rather on those differences between them which are termed functionally relevant and distinguish functional units in the sound system of a given language. Sounds that are distinctive units are called phonemes, and their systematic study is called phonology. Here, based on the structuralism, we define phonology and phoneme. Structuralism defines phoneme in this way, that sounds that are distinctive units are called phonemes. Sounds that are distinctive units are called phoneme. When I want you to define phoneme in the viewpoint of structuralism, you should say that the sound are distinctive units, phoneme are distinctive units, and phonology is their systematic study of these units. Note that the term phoneme already had a long history. It was introduced in the 1860 by Baudouin de Courtney. European and American structuralists have defined the object of phonology in somewhat different ways. In accord with their focus on abstract paradigms or concrete distributional classes respectively. But the common aim of structural phonological research is to carefully select from all observed sound differences those sounds that are used to differentiate between two meanings and to set them apart from those that have no such semantic effects. Only the first category of differences, called distinctive oppositions, are judged pertinent to the language system. Once the object of research is reduced to distinctive oppositions, the phonological system of each language can be described in terms of recurrent patterns. The definition of a phoneme as a minimal distinctive unit. The definition of the phoneme as a minimal distinctive unit. It is another definition for phoneme, but it is the same as the previous definition, but here we have different words. Phoneme is a minimal distinctive unit. Implies that it cannot be further subdivided into successive distinctive units, but especially for European structuralists, this doesn't prevent its analysis in terms of still smaller components, which are simultaneously realized to form a phoneme. According to structural phonology, there are a limited number of elementary components. For every language, a maximum of about 10 such traits can be found. These traits, when combined in a variety of ways, generate a close inventory of a phoneme of the language. And each phoneme is thus seen as a complex of these elementary components called distinctive features. You should know all of this notion and all of this point about the phoneme in terms of structuralism. So, there is an agreement among phonologists about the principle of analyzing the phoneme. There has been considerable controversy concerning the nature of distinctive feature, focused on the question as to whether these features should be ordered in binary pairs, as well as on the issue of their phonetic reality. In Europe, the Prague Circle, which were Trotsky Jakobson, was the front runner in the elaboration of the basic principle of phonology in the 1920s and 1930s. Also, other scholars developed competing theories, like first, J.R. First prosodic phonology, in an attempt to overcome the rigid structuralist distinction between phonology and morphology. Phonological features are attributed to prosodies, intonation stress, voice, vowel harmony, and etc., rather than to phonemic units. It is safe to say, however, that by the 1960s, structuralist phonology had been universally supplanted by generative phonology and its offshoots. Another title is Structuralism and Morphosyntax. American linguists faced with the urgent task of describing the rapidly disappearing American Indian languages developed from the 1920s onward a descriptive morphosyntax, the principles of which simultaneously display great similarity as well as important differences with the structuralist ideas of Saussure. Following Bloomfield and Boas in 1911, their attention was directed at methods enabling the linguist to uncover the units of a given language and to describe it in the most objective way possible. In order to avoid any mentalist prejudice, they were to base themselves exclusively on formal and observable data. Conspicuously avoiding any reference to the meaning of the utterances. In morphosyntax 2, Bloomfield and the post-Bloomfieldian focused on the study of syntagmatic relations rather than paradigmatic relations. Okay. Bloomfield and the post-Bloomfieldian focus on the study of syntagmatic relations rather than the paradigmatic ones. We should know that they focus on the syntagmatic relation. The study of the distribution of elements allows an exhaustive description of the set of environment for a linguistic unit or class. This analysis, when applied at all levels of morphology and syntax, generates a hierarchically ordered and systematic description far superior to a mere inventory. To the distributionalist, Language manifests itself first and foremost as a set of combinatory regularities revealed by distributional structure. The additional procedures of substitution and permutations allow segmentation of data samples into constitutive units or immediate constituents, while also allowing the reconstruction of the class of elements that can appear in the same position. It should be emphasized that such a class is a syntagmatic class, which, contrary to what many commentators would have us believe, has nothing to do with the paradigmatic in the sense of European structuralism. You should know that. They pay attention to the syntagmatic, not paradigmatic axis of language. In domain of syntax, a number of interesting structuralist approaches can be distinguished. Undoubtedly, the most influential contribution came from the Tesnier, his theory of verb valency and hierarchical syntactic structures, so-called connections, laid the foundation for a new theory of syntax known as dependency grammar. Dependency grammar is based on the Tesnier idea. But what was the dependency grammar? It was set out in Elements to Syntax Structure, published posthumously in the 1959, in which Tesnier explains that the traditional dichotomy between subject and predicate, which goes back to Plato and Greco-Roman linguistic tradition, rests on a logical distinction rather than a linguistic one, and should therefore be banned from syntax. Okay, it is the dependency grammar. Tesnier proposes to analyze sentences as constituted by a verb that takes a number of arguments, ranging from 1 to 3 or 4, if one includes causative as well. Tesnier, to which it simultaneously assigns to a range of syntactic as well as semantic properties in the 1960s. This theory was taken up by Fillmore to form a central part of this case grammar, and through the work of Fillmore and others, it eventually became a part of modern generative syntax as well. Okay, Tesnier defined the dependency grammar, and Tesnier overlooked the subject and predicate, and he defined the sentences based on the verb and about the and defined the case grammar, and which is common now in generative syntax. And he told us we can define the sentences and consider them based on the verb. And some verb can have 2 parts, some verb can have 3 parts. It's based on the nature of that verb. In addition to valency, Fillmore introduced the term of valency, and that part of the sentence is based on the valency of that verb. Some verb can have a number of arguments. In addition to valency and dependency theory, Tesnier introduced the concept of translation. The valency is this mother. It is the valency. It is the concept of valency. Tesnier introduced the concept of translation, which is comparable to the later Heresian-Chomsky notion of transformation. Tesnier uses the term translation to refer to a procedure whereby a part of a speech is being recategorized, for example, a noun as an adjective. Peter in Peter's book, which is adjective, or it can be adverb. Opera in the they sing at the opera, or verb to sang. Occasionally, translation, you should know the definition of translation and its example. Occasionally, the translation doesn't alter the initial category of the word, but only the internal structure of the phrase. For example, tomorrow until tomorrow. Yet the main thrust of the theory of translation is that it provides structuralism with a powerful tool to analyze complex sentences in a fairly straightforward way. Tesnier explains that entire sentences with a verb as the structural head constituent can serve as input for category changing procedures. For example, the sentence, he will bring the copies, function as a noun. John said that he will bring the copies. The element that being an optional translative whose sole function it is to convert a sentence into an argument of a transitive or divalent verb said of another sentence. Another matter is semantic, structuralism and semantic. Also, the works of Terrier 1931, Yelmazov 1935, and 1937, and Jacobson 1936 had proven that structuralist methodology was readily applicable to problems of semantics as well. Structuralism fully penetrated into the domain of semantics only after having extensively demonstrated its efficiency in phonology. Many linguists continue to adopt that meaning could be the object of analysis as systematic as those in phonology and morphosyntax. While post-Bloomfieldian or Bloomfieldian descriptivism banned semantic from the realm of distributional analysis, a number of European schools like Jacobson, Yelmazov, Weisgerber, Caserio invested much energy in adapting structuralism to the study of meaning. Jacobson and Yelmazov were among the first to show in seminal papers on the meaning of Russian cases in 1936 and paradigmatic structure of lexicon by Yelmazov in 1957 how the methodology of structuralism could be coherently applied to linguistic meaning as well. After that, many attempts were undertaken to make structural semantics a full-fledged branch of structural linguistics. For an overview, can see Caserio and Tickler in 1974 and Matthesius 2001. Structuralist approaches to semantic haven't only been concerned with the lexicon, but with the entire domain of grammar as well. Okay, I want to repeat it again. Structuralist approaches to semantics haven't only been concerned with the lexicon, but with the entire domain of grammar as well, number, voice, case, argument, structure, and etc. And their applications have generated significant methodological innovations. Structural semantics is based on the assumption that meaning of linguistic unit can be identified by comparing all items of the paradigmatic as to their content. Every sign, like lexical or grammatical unit, entering into paradigmatic relation with other similar signs in the language. In the study of a lexicon, this assumption has given rise to a new method for the analysis of meaning known as componential analysis. If phonemes can be analyzed in terms of pertinent features, the hypothesis runs lexemes can be analyzed on the basis of the same principle and decomposed into so-called themes, or distinctive features of the content. However, in comparison to the phonological system, the lexicon of the language is characterized by a much higher number of features to be taken into account. Componential analysis consists of decomposing every meaning into elementary meaning parts that can be detected by means of commutation or substitution test. If the replacement of one separate semantic features by another one causes change of form, then the feature is a pertinent theme in the language. If not, it is not pertinent and merely a variation of content. For instance, if one replaces man with animal in the meaning of the German verb essen or eat, the form of the lexeme necessarily has to change as well present. However, if one replaces solid food with liquid food, this wouldn't entail a change of a verb form, which is essen, means to eat meat. Fleisch essen, to eat meat. Soup essen, to eat soup. Hence, the difference between solid food and liquid food cannot count as a distinctive features in the opposition between seen and present. Clearly, the aim of componential analysis is not to enumerate all characteristics of an object, but to extract from linguistic content the elements that are linguistically relevant, and only this. The meaning of a word can then be represented as a complex of more basic distinctive features which can be found in a variety of units. Themes are minimal, abstract, mostly highly recurrent, and replaceable features, and they generate the complex meaning in the language system when they are combined in various ways. Okay, here we have the definition of themes. You should be able to define the themes. I want to repeat it again. What we mean by themes? Themes are minimal, abstract, mostly highly recurrent, replaceable features, and they generate complex meaning in the language system when they are combined in various ways. Although the notion of theme has been widely accepted in structural semantic analysis, there has never been real consensus on the logical and typological properties of themes, nor on their internal organization within the linguistic unit. A remarkable achievement of structural semantics is its application of the important concept of neutralization, first introduced in Prague phonology, to meaning. Okay, a remarkable achievement of structural semantics is its application of the important concept of neutralization, first introduced in Prague phonology, to meaning. In specific environments, certain phonological oppositions are neutralized. You should know about neutralization and about its environment, like the opposition between voiced and unvoiced stop in word final position in languages such as German and Dutch. However, the same holds true mutatis mutandis for certain semantic oppositions. In the English lexicon, for example, man is in semantic opposition to woman, but in a sentence like man is endowed with intelligence, the opposition between these words is neutralized, and man includes the meaning of woman too. Okay, you should know, dear student, about the neutralization and about the school which define this term. Neutralizable oppositions can also be found in grammar too, beyond the semantic. One can refer to the extensive functions of the present tense of the verb in comparison to the intensive past or future tense. In many Indo-European languages, the uses of the singular of noun vis-a-vis the plural. According to some authors, like Yilmazov, Casario, neutralization is a pervasive trait of natural languages that distinguishes them from logical and mathematical systems. The main accomplishment of structural semantics is to have shown, first, that the lexicon of a language is not an unordered pile of accumulated units, but that it can be subdivided into lexical fields which group words on the basis of their semantic relatedness. Okay, here we will be familiar with the concept of semantic in the structuralism. And second, that the semantic structure of a language is made up of a myriad of microstructures, the elements of which are connected by precise and to a certain extent also formalizable relations. Although the linguistic status of semantic fields has been contested mainly because it has proved difficult to define the boundaries both between different fields and between pertinent or functional and non-pertinent referential features. Componential analysis of meaning has been a very fertile field of research. Not only is it still present in one shape or another in most contemporary work on semantic, it has also been extended to unit beyond sentence level. Okay. Another approach to meaning conceived by American structuralists attempt to relate it to distribution. You should know about the American structuralist viewpoint about the meaning. The hypothesis previously formulated by Harris that two morphemes with different meaning will also show distributional differences in one way or another was refined and put into practice, especially in J. Apprecian analysis of Russian verbs. For Apprecian, not every semantic difference is necessarily expressed in a syntactic difference, but every syntactic difference corresponds to an important semantic difference. A special kind of componential analysis which had considerable impact on linguistic research in the 1960s aimed at reconciling componential and distributional analysis with contemporary principles of generative grammar. Katz and Fodor in 1963 distinguished for every lexical unit, apart from a number of components claimed to be intrinsic semantic features of the unit, so-called selection restriction, which account for possibilities of its combining with other. They propose a commutation of the meaning of utterances starting from the syntactic properties of the individual lexical unit. For those units that combine at the level of syntax, the selection of a restriction of one unit must be compatible with those of the other. However, Katz and Fodor's approach was heavily criticized by several authors, who showed that the approach was seriously flawed in several respects, in particular by not being able to make a clear and coherent distinction between syntagmatic semantic features proper and components which originate in their interpretation of sentence. Therefore, Katz and Fodor's approach cannot count as a structuralist without qualification. Finally, attention should be drawn to the work of Louis Strauss, He was strongly influenced by Saussure as well as Jacobson and applied structuralist principles to the analysis of kinship system of different societies and to the study of myths, thereby extending a structuralist methodology to application outside the field of linguistic properties and anthropology. Starting from the principle that human culture is made up of symbolic system in which no single element has meaning except as an integral part of a set of structural connections, Louis Strauss grouped all possible kinship systems into a schema containing three basic kinship structures constructed out of two types of exchange of women between groups, which you can see here. It's French words, which it is not necessary to read them. The structures operate on pairs of binary position, which are considered to be at the base of social structure and culture. In his structural approach to myths, Louis Strauss described the widely dispersed folk tales of tribal South America as all related to one another through a series of transformations. They reveal a common symbolic structure, a claim made of minimal positional elements organized in paradigmatic and combined in different ways. Okay, dear students, I think it is enough until the structuralism and discourse analysis. Please read these paragraphs, and you should know the feature of this linguistic part in terms of structuralism. At first, it may be hard for you to memorize them. You can look at this video many times to learn them, and ask me please your questions through the WhatsApp group. I try to clear this concept for you. Therefore, it is enough until the structuralism and discourse analysis. Please read them and ask me your question and summarize them for your task, and for your final exam you should read their details. Thank you.